talk to you today about STM, P, and XHIM, which is a little bit more of what's been in the title. Let's see, how do I change this? Great. The overview of the talk is I'm going to talk about system managed mode. I know that a good number of this crowd has some knowledge of SMM. And then I'm going to talk about the STM, the modifications that I've done to the STM over the past many years, and an application that we run on STM, which is an introspection engine, and I'll give you some brief on that, and we'll be planning on doing this in the future. System management mode. It's an x86 processor mode. It's mistakenly called ring -2. I personally don't like that term because it's so like if you understand how rings work, it's just really orthogonal to it. But it really is the most privileged mode on the x86 processor. It's entered normally only by a system management interrupt, SMI. Normally this cannot be blocked. There are certain ways you can block it in certain situations of the processor, but in normal usage it's not blocked. What happens is it takes all the CPUs, brings them into the system management mode, and the operating system at this point does not know that it's happened. Now, if you're clever, you can figure it out. If you use some timers and stuff, like the previous speaker had mentioned, you could probably do the math. Say, yeah, I just took an SMM. It executes in a special space called SMRAM. And this area is defined both by the processor and also by the chipset. That way, only processors that are in SMM can enter in the SMRAM, and the I/O is prevented from putting any, so it's protected from any type of DMA. The microcode normally on the CPUs checks this areas for consistency. So you can't say have one CPU have one SMRAM in one area and another CPU has SMRAM in another place. They get upset when you do that. It's a good way to get a machine check. The way of exiting them is done by an RSM instruction, which just says return out of system management mode. This is Intel's term called dual monitor treatment. And when Intel came out with the VTX technology, they also extended that technology to SMM as well. And so what is possible is that you can have two hypervisors run on the system. One that we all know like Zen. The second called STM. And in SMM, the root it does have a root VM, just like in your regular modes. In this case, you have two possible entries. One is a VM call, which produces a VM exit, and also you can do by SMI. What the hardware does in the case of SMI, it translates that SMI into a VM exit. So the STM can look at it and say, yeah, I've just taken SMI. I know what to do with that. Or if it says this is done by a VM call, that means somebody in the hypervisor is trying to get a hold of me for some service. The relationship, if you know anything about VTX, the relationship you have what is known as a root VM and a guest VM. And the root VM is essentially what the hypervisor runs in. And root VMs are what is allowed to create any other VM on the system. And your guest VMs are the other VMs that we normally know about. So it's basically the hypervisor on VTX technology runs as a VM, in a VM in itself. And so in the case of when you've taken when you've gone into SMM, the STM becomes the root VM, and even though the other VM that's been interrupted, it doesn't matter whether it's a guest VM or root VM on the other side, it's in relationship to the STM, it's a guest VM. Now the STM is really a very simple hypervisor. I think one of the previous guest speakers mentioned a reduced STM. Well, that's very reduced because all it is the STM is really a VMCS switcher. Because when it takes an SMI, it says, oh, I'm going to switch from the guest, what was used to be the running guest VM, and switch over to a VM that's running the SMI handler, which is the part of the BIOS, which is an SMM. The difference happens now is that the SMI handler is now running in a guest VM. And that VM now, the SMI handler is restricted by the protections afforded by a guest VM. So you can restrict that handler any way you wish. The Intel reference manual on this says that when the STM gets set up, there is a BIOS resource list. So the BIOS says, I want access or I need access to these resources. The STM gives it to that. The operating system comes in and says, I need to keep the BIOS out of these resources. And so the STM, by policy, says, I will give the BIOS the leeway in it. Now, that could create some problems if the operating system says, I need you to keep you out of this. And so there has to be a resolution between the operating system and the BIOS people. So that's what I'm talking about in this bottom part is that it does manage a policy that is checked. The STM looks like something like this. If you notice that the middle, on the left side here, you're on your left, there is the STM. On the right is the CPU running in the normal mode. And basically, you have the protection that's provided by the the VTX page table. So the SMI handler running the VTX VMGS is prevented from accessing the say the kernel memory, for example. On the other hand, the hardware that is the processor and also the chipset is preventing the VMGS from going down an SM RAM. And also, even if you run it in the VM root, as a VM root, the VMM also cannot access that. However, the STM can see rest of the memory. So STM in this case is God. It actually can set up its page table such that it can see the whole system. The fortunate part about this is that the STM is extremely simple. It's very short code paths. So it doesn't do very much that you can actually, someone can actually sit down and understand what it is doing. Okay. Overview of STP. Okay, I've taken an STM and I modified it to provide what is known as protected execution. Ian talked about a little bit earlier about the execution under micro Zen, which is that is a form of protected execution. If you've taken a module, you want to set it aside such that no other part of the operating system, no other components can look and see what you're doing. And this is what we've done down here. So what we've done to this part is that we're going to put a dynamic integrity measure called XHIM down in there. Okay. So I've defined that protected execution is something that I can put into a container that it can't look out of the container. It's going to be executed in a privileged area, in a private area, not privileged. But no one else can look in at the same time. Another example of protected execution is SGX. It's the idea of SGX is, of course, to keep the operating system from looking into what the user's VM is executing. So what we have now on STMPE is that now I have an additional measurement agent and also a temporary module as well. In other words, the measurement agent is going to be what I call a permanent guest or permanent protected execution VM. There's also the capability of running a temporary one where I can throw some code down there, run it, and get some result back. And the communications is done via a shared buffer in the kernel space. I've done two different. When I originally started doing this project, we had created or had contracted with Dell to create an STM as a proof of concept. And so we had the source code of that, and it's what I took, and I modified the Dell STM to do protected execution. And by August of 1985, Intel put out a reference STM on GitHub, and so I moved over to that. That way, if I needed to, because eventually our goal here is to open source what I've done. And so, I moved over to the Intel STM, and part of that, this is, anybody can access this. They actually has instructions on how to even incorporate this in Tiana Core BIOS. Of course, as you noticed in the earlier discussions, unless you have a system that can, like Open Platform, where you can just take the Tiana Core and compile it and load it down, you don't have too many options. In this case here, you can use a Mental board. And so you go to firmware.intel.com, and you can find out more information on that. As noted early, the second execute module is restricted from looking at the rest of the system, or its access is restricted by the policy in the STM. And it's different from the BIOS-centric model. Okay, the BIOS-centric model says the BIOS has to access certain things. This says, in the case we're going to be talking about a little bit later, with introspection, it allows access to kernel memory, but we only allow read-only access. So we're able to restrict that by use of the EPT tables. We don't allow access for the protected execution, say the MSRs at I/O and things like that. Now there's some gotchas here, and the reason why there's gotchas is when I'm running an introspection engine that I'm going to discuss in a couple of minutes, I usually spend 2 or 3 seconds down there doing the introspection. Now, if you ever done anything in SMM, you know that's an awfully long time to keep a module in SMM. The nice thing about VTX technology is I only have to run one processor in system management mode. All the other processors stay out of it. So what I have to worry about in this case is that the operating system losing a processor for several seconds. In most like in Zen, which is what we've been running this on, Zen likes to scatter interrupts. Have each processor handle a certain set of interrupts. Well, you have to move the interrupts off the processor, otherwise it gets upset. So you have certain little issues like that you have to deal with. And it's true really for any technology where you go in the system management mode, is that if you don't deal with the operating system doesn't expect the processor to disappear, bad things can happen. It would be nice to have a way in the chipset or the processor to say, hey, this is temporarily in SMM mode. Please, operating system, don't get upset. Now, XHIM is an STM application. This is based on LKIM, which stands for Linux Kernel Integrity Module Measurer. The LKIM actually the LKIM, there's what we call the KIM engine. It's core to actually our introspection engines. Right now, the LKIM stands for Linux Kernel Integrity Monitor, and what that does is we use contextual inspection. It's a dynamic integrity monitor. We don't just take signatures. We actually look at state. XHIM runs on Zen. It's currently in development. It's been the weak cousin to the other two because until I was able to run it under the STM, it wasn't as much interest. Now WinKIM is also under development. It's an alpha state. We actually run it against the Windows 10. It's the problem we have with Windows 10 is, of course, the Windows 10 is like a moving target, but it actually is pretty good. Every time you turn around, every patch update to Windows 10 that you hear about, they've changed something major. So it's really a moving target. So I'm going to talk a little bit about dynamic integer measurement. Now, that does not rely on signatures. Instead, we look at things that were like what would an implant do to the kernel? It's really what it comes down to. And an implant will cause some type of inconsistent kernel state. And when KIMs detect that inconsistent state. And so in other words, we have a 99% probability of catching a 0 day in this type of system. So advanced persistent threats will have difficulty in a system that's defended by the KIMs. And so how do we do this? It's essentially, we have a known good state. We know, and we have that we say this is what we consider to be a good state. And if we deviate from that state, then something has happened. That's the Air Force 40,000-foot view. The other thing that we found, and when we started deploying LKIM with the Navy some years ago, the KIMs have been around for about 15 years actually, so it's pretty much a very mature product, is that we found the initial problems is that we kept on finding Linux bugs. And so we had to fix the Linux bugs because there's no difference between a bug and an attacker. They create perpetrations in a state that you don't expect to have. Okay, and so the first thing we had to do is we had to fix a bunch of Linux bugs, so we stopped these these alarms from coming off. So the XHIM is a permanent protected execution module. It stays in there all the time. It's loaded when XHIM comes up, and it's now evoked by a SMI interrupt every 16 seconds. Now, 16 seconds is kind of arbitrary because I run it on my development system. So it's always running in the background, and it takes about 2 seconds currently to do its measurement. And that's kind of an arbitrary number, too, because we're still adding more tests into the measurement, and the amount of stuff that gets measured is also depends on how active the system is, okay? But in those 2 seconds, when I'm typing on the system or doing something, I don't notice that it's running in the background, which is kind of a good thing. Now, I'm running on essentially an 8-thread system, okay? So that gets it in the back. Now, why STMPE? One thing about these systems, like any type of introspection system that runs in the same memory, is that if the attacker knows about it, the attacker has the capability of making it lie. Now that I've placed XHIM down at the bottom of the chain, I'm able to look at Zen and say, is there a problem with Zen or not? If I move up to the next level and have a virtual machine running, say, Windows, for example, or LCHIM, I'll be running LCHIM watching Linux in a separate virtual machine. Well, that means if I can't trust Zen, then Zen could go say, maybe I can go modify the LCHIM to make it lie, so that the people running Linux over here don't know that we've been hosted. So when I do it from the bottom like this, I'm able to verify that what comes out of the LCHIM measurement is good. And we have a paper that Umiter did a study for some years ago, saying this is the way you want to do. You want to work your way from the bottom to the top in your measurement chain here. Excuse me. So notice that XHIM, actually, when I first started running XHIM, I used to just start it by a VM call from an application. I would just load it down there, run it, take a measurement. As I evolved this system, I eventually moved to an SMI timer interrupt, and so it runs automatically by itself. XHIM is incorporated the LCHIM source tree. When we started the project, XHIM was developed actually to run in the kernel memory, the Zen kernel memory at the same time. And so we actually were able to take that and move it down into the STM. Now, it still is capable of running in the kernel memory. But we hope, but obviously, that means that it's open for any type of attack. The advantage of running in the STM actually is that we actually get more hardware state information by using that. Because when I take an SMI interrupt, I get to look at the VMCSs that the processor is running. In fact, I get all the processor VMCSs. I get the CR3. So if it's outside, I don't get the CR3 of all the other processors. I don't necessarily know if the attacker has played with the CR3 and making me think I'm checking a system that's looking good. When I'm down in the STM, I pretty much know that the CR3 I got is the one I got. So I can go out and check, is it what I got or not? So that's the strength of that. So I get more information by running an SMM. Now, the reason why I say it's incorporated in this source tree, when we first started XHIM had diverged from the LCHIM source tree, and we had to bring it back in. That way we take care of, they were able to take some advantages of the patches that we had created for XHIM. But also LCHIM has had a lot of improvements during those years of time. And so now we have all the CHIMs, the WinCHIM, XHIM, and LCHIM on the same source tree. Now, current status. I get both on-demand and timer execution, which means I can actually demand it. I can send a VM call, say, please run me I want to do an attestation. I want to do an introspection. And it'll look at it and say, yeah, good. The SMM, of course, STM provides a processor state. It provides VMCS layout information. Well, what does it mean by that? Well, the VMCS is a table, for each one of the virtual machines. However, on processor families, they're different. The offsets are all different. And rather than say, oh, I need to go and get all the .h files for each one of the different processor families, I just went ahead and did some research on the net and incorporated, was able to write code that says I go and figure out what the offsets are. So when XHIM asks for it, I go ahead and say, here's the offsets. Because when the XHIM gets this information, it goes out into the memory and looks at all the VMCSs when it's doing its introspection. So yeah, we parse VMCSs. We look at the EPT table. So if an attacker is running in a virtual machine and trying to manipulate Xen, I don't see the attacker in a virtual machine because that's a different CHIM that's doing the looking. But I see that the anomaly of saying, hey, the EPT table says overlap with kernel memory, Xen kernel memory. That's not a good thing. So you can flag that. We also clear out the XHIM heap before execution. And when I say clear out XHIM heap, that means I clear the page tables. XHIM starts from ground zero on every execution. The reason why we do that is it's notion called reset hashable. We want to be able to hash XHIM and say, yeah, the code's still there. Of course, the EPT tables, protected by read-only and execute-only type of privileges. But we want to also make sure that, say, an attacker maybe has figured out a certain way to arrange the bits in Xen kernel memory, and maybe some of the tables, that says, maybe I can get XHIM to lie if I somehow munge the state in certain ways. If I can do that. So I clear it out every time. So if the attacker's going to do that, he's going to have to do it every time. He's going to have to be really careful. So in other words, I can't propagate bad state. So every time I do it, it's going to be new state coming. Okay. Future. We are doing an internal pilot where we're going to actually, drink our own Kool-Aid. And we're going to basically have on a laptop. We're going to have STMPE with XHIM at the bottom, using OpenXT with LKIM and WinKIM, depending upon what's going on the other parts, so that our Windows users will actually be measured at that time. It's a part of it. We have an internal system where we use wireless in our research, in the information systems research. It's a little bit different than the rest of the agency. The rest of the agency, they really don't want to use wireless. And we're incorporating wireless that's encrypted. That way we can run unclass and class at the same time. Depending upon the laptops are still maintained. There's still unclassified laptops, but we're able to maintain an unclassified laptop in a classified environment, hooking out to the internet. And so everything is all going to be together on these laptops. That's a project we're going to be starting in this fall. And so we'll be moving over to OpenXT. As I mentioned there, you run it on Xen 4.9, I believe. Is it 4.9? Yeah. Another project I'm going to be doing, and this is going to be more an experiment because anybody who's dealt with SMRAM, there's only so much of it down there. At the moment, we get like about 3 meg on a Dell 990, for example. Also want to put a virtualized TPM down there because one of the problems with virtual TPMs is they run in the same space as kernel memory, as is Xen kernel. I mean, Xen kernel can actually influence a virtual TPM. So I want to put it down there. That means I'm going to have to figure out some techniques of reusing space at that level. So stay tuned. That's going to be interesting. And of course, I've noticed there, I'm one signature away from open sourcing this code. Okay, one signature away. Yes.
Open source is just XHIM or?
LKIM, not XHIM, just the STMPE code. Agency by policy will not be open sourcing this. We'll license it, but we won't open source it. Oops, questions? Yes.
So you mentioned that SMRAM is limited.
Yes.
All of the guest VM, SMM, are they running in regular memory?
SMRAM.
Okay, so they all have to fit inside of SMRAM.
Yes.
Okay. And so when they're in SM, since they were running with the SMI bit set, does this mean that they have access to the flash and other protected resources, or does the STM, is it able to trap those accesses?
What happens is they run like a virtual machine, and so the page tables and everything else contain their accesses. The same thing with the SMI handler.
But if they attempt to access I/O resources like the PCH, is that being trapped via memory now?
It's essentially not a remote. It's essentially you have the you set up the VMCS that says he cannot access that.
Okay.
So in other words, it's like if you're setting up a regular guest VM. It's the same type of protection scheme.
So if you want to implement NVRAM writable variables,
Mm-hmm.
you have to implement that in the STM.
Yeah. Because you don't. If you want to. Say like if you're wanting to boot in your own little operating system down there, for example, and you want to have it in I guess I need a little bit more on your question because all the accesses are covered by page table protections. And so.
Right. So if you want to write to the SPI flash.
Okay. You're going to have to have the table set up to allow you to do that, but that's also going to yeah, you'd have to have the page tables would have to be set up to allow you to access that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
you don't right now. You don't have a module in STM to do authenticated variable writes, for instance.
not at the moment. It's nothing that precludes that. Okay, it's sort of like I've taken what the Intel is provided on there. I've added this capability to it. There'll be other capabilities we want to add to it. Sort of like for example, XHIM wants to sign its output, so that when we send it to an appraiser, he knows he's happy with what we got. Well, we need to hold some secrets down there and provide them, with some type of way of signing that. That's certain things we still need to implement, and that'll be actually be done like when we do this pilot project. What I didn't fail to mention is we're going to incorporate a larger measurement system. So So any of the measurements that are done, say by XHIM or LCHIM or WinCHIM, we're going to actually send these back to a central, server that does the measurement. Does the appraisals of that. And so right now that protocol has to be worked out. So I've actually kept the XHIM team from doing any of that because I said I'd rather you get the measurements, the introspection stuff done. Once we figure out how we want to do this communications between the servers and stuff, then we'll work that into the scheme. Yes.
When you do open source STM-PE, what are the requirements or barriers to running that on any given hardware?
On any given hardware, STM-friendly BIOS. In other words, your BIOS has to have STM support. And the Intel page on the firmware.intel has the stuff that loads the STM, does all the stuff that's supposed to be doing it. Unfortunately, it's not in Tiano Core, on the mainstream Tiano Core BIOS, because they have a committee that decides what's what's get into there, and they've constantly voted it down the times that they've attempted to do it. So, talk to your...
In your experience, how easy is it to find a machine that you can run this on?
It is not easy. You can essentially, you can do this on a mental board, okay? I can do it on my machines at work because I happen to have, STM-friendly BIOS, but those machines are getting old, okay? And I've cached a whole bunch of them, to make sure I got them. We're trying to get an STM-friendly BIOS written for the pilot. We're in negotiations for that. These open compute platforms that were talked about earlier, since you control the BIOS, you can put that, the stuff that interfaces with the STM in that and run yourself an STM. So if you open compute platforms, there's no reason why those won't be supporting an STM. because really what it is the BIOS just has to set up, a resource list and set up a pointer to the SMI handler and move it into the MSEG. And after that, it's up to the operating system to start it up. I mean, it's not hard for the BIOS.
See a strong argument for the next good. Got a couple of questions.
Yes. Go ahead.
Real quick, I'm assuming you saw last week they were able to use Spectre to bypass the SMI protection.
Yes.
Okay.
I saw that, and I haven't, unfortunately, because of our firewalls attempting to protect us. I wasn't able to get that. But from talking to other people, it's no different from any of the other Spectres things. And my assessment of that is, if you already, the most you're going to be getting out in an attack like that is if you know what the source code is. Because that's part of the Spectre is you have to have an idea of what code what part of the BIOS you're going to, the code you're going to manipulate to get to do the writing, which means you have to know what you want to do. The best thing you're going to be getting out, that already tells me, oh, you already know what the SMI handle looks like. That means the only thing you're going to be doing is finding some secret, like a key or something that's hidden down there. The Chicken Little aspects of it say, oh, this has compromised the whole system. Well, I hate to say this, but you already have to be in ring 0 to do that attack against SMM. You can't do it from virtual machine, mainly because the nature of what's going on here. So you've already got control of the system by this time. I'll get you next, and you'll be after that, yes.
I'm thinking, since you have to deal with this unusual SMM environment, what is the advantage of going SMM way versus like nested virtualization like Romeo, where you stick another hypervisor underneath and then everything seems to be normal?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, basically, I have at one point in the system where I know that there's no one possible way, unless there's a bug in the STM, that someone's going to affect the measurement. The nice thing about, say, bromium, the case that was talked about earlier, is that's a nice small hypervisor, which means I can have a very small XHIM that doesn't have to spend much time measuring. And so that actually works really well, because the trouble with doing Zen, there's quite a bit there to do. So now I've reduced that space. Now I can if I measure that, then my next, let's say, Hyper-V runs on top of that, for example, or something else. Then the Hyper-V can run at the next level, and so I can bootstrap it up, starting with something very simple. That's strong. The other advantage of doing it is that I get all the hardware registers at that level. When I'm running to the side, I don't get the registers, and so that means you could lie to me, especially if I don't get the CR3. In the back.
So you just said that you already have to be in ring 0 to make this attack happen.
Yeah, to SMM, yes.
So SMM is still more privileged than ring 0, so you actually
Yes.
still get more capabilities out of that.
You have to break into ring 0. See, what Spectre does is just read stuff out to you. You're reading the contents of. You're not getting all the privileges of it, but you already have privileges. You already got everything. Huh?
But not as many, right?
The only extra, if you get into SMM, the things you can do is set the MSR bits that are controlled under SMM. That's what you're getting, and which means you could write to the flash and stuff like that. But what I've noted there is that you're able to read stuff out. You already have the code to do this sort of attack. You pretty much have to know what the source code is, because you have to know what you want to manipulate to do the Spectre attack, because you're manipulating essentially a loop or some type of in there, and so you have to make sure you're directing your data input into the system such that you're causing that path to be executed. Okay, so you have to know. So you have to already know what's down there. If you're using it to read it out, then you're taking shots in the dark. There are easier ways to get that. And so right now, my assessment of it, from looking at it, is, yeah, you can make it, if there's some secrets down there, like a key, which could open up something else, then yeah, that's probably what you may get.
I guess the other question, so Spectre, you're right, you do need to know what's down there.
Yeah.
But you called ring 0, traditional ring 0, acts like a guest to the SMM.
Yeah, well, what happens, see, one of the things that people don't much talk about, when Intel implemented VTX technology, okay, everything runs in a virtual machine, including the hypervisor. Okay, it just happens to be called the root VM versus guest VM, and its additional privilege is basically I can start guest VMs. Okay, that's the hypervisor, and so when you take an SMI or you take a VM exit, or you do a VM call, from the perspective of the STM becomes the root VM. And everything else, if you look at the VMCS tables and go for the pointers, everybody else becomes a guest VM on top. And that's important because when you're loading doing the VM pointer loads, you have to know when you want to go back, that's the pointer that you're keeping is the pointer back to that VMCS.
So based on that, could you run a meltdown type attack where you don't have to know what's in the STM against what's in the STM? Or what's in the SMM test?
I've been thinking about that one, okay? I would say, let me think. Your base, okay. See, meltdown requires you to be in the same memory space, okay? And in this case here, SMM is not directly in your same memory space, but the question in my mind is, and which I have not experimented with, is, okay, if I sort of map it into the same memory space, put that into my page tables, and then try to do the attack, would it make a difference or not? And I've got an intern. I'll let him experiment. Give him something to. I'm serious. It's not. I've thought about that, but the question becomes, is will that happen or not? And I've really, I've given it some thought, but then I got distracted back to other stuff and let other people worry about it. But it is actually a good and valid question. I need to do some experiments. Any other questions? Okay, if you want to take offline, just let me know. I'll be around all afternoon.
I guess one more question.
Yes.
When do you think it will be available?
Oh, the signature.
One signature can take a long time.
You're exactly right. You see, you got to understand, NSA, we are a government agency. We are, and we have aspired to have a bureaucracy just like all the other government agencies. We're famous for that. But, I would like to say real soon now, but I've been telling people that for a while, and I don't want to disappoint anybody. But, yeah, we're working on that. Yeah. Because I like to get it out there and let people play with it. I mean, there's Beno boards out there, and you can use it on that. Yes.
Is that like a journal level signature or like a director level signature?
It is actually we have a technology transfer office, okay, that handles all that. And actually, they do a very good job. The agency actually is very good about open sourcing this stuff. She wants to basically, cross her, dot her I's and cross her T's and checking everything. And in the past couple of months, because of the meltdown stuff and other things, I haven't been able to get back to. It's like when I used to be in the Army, my trick was, if I had to take care of something, I'd go sit on somebody's desk and stare at them and stare them down. I haven't had a chance to do that. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.